Hi. This is the first talk from the Salon Series. My name is Lolita Cros, and I'm the curator of the Salon, the Wing Art Gallery. Today I'm delighted to welcome one of the artists featured in our DUMBO space, Barney. I think you can... Over a 40-year career, Barney has become one of the most influential photographers in contemporary art. Her iconic tableaus portraying the daily life of social elite are in the permanent collection of the numerous institutions from MoMA to LACMA. Tonight we'll be talking about her influences, her relationship to women, and her upcoming solo booth opening at Freeze tomorrow with Paul Casman Gallery. So without further ado, I'd like to start with this photo, which I'm not sure if you can see it. You can see it, okay. This is one of your first photos. So let's start with your, you have a pretty unusual path. So why don't you talk about how you got into photography first as an interest and then as a profession?
Hi everybody, this is fun to be here. I didn't think you were all going to be so young though. And you're very lucky to be able to come here. Very exciting. First of all, I grew up in New York City, which is becoming more and more unusual. And I went to school, a private school uptown, for 12 years. In my junior year, I had a history of art teacher, which in those days, early 60s, was very unusual. Her name was Margareta Scolari. Her husband was Alfred Barr, who's one of the great directors of the Museum of Modern Art. That history of art class was so sophisticated and so rich, I think it could have been in an MFA class in a university. And I think that she turned me on to art more than anybody else. My family were art collectors, and so I grew up surrounded by art, usually impressionistic paintings. But this teacher was the one who really made my heart beat. So that was the beginning. And then I went on. I went to college for 4 months and left. It just wasn't for me. And when I was 18, I decided to study the history of art and went to live in Florence, Italy. 18, 19 years old, and lived with a family. That was kind of not so unusual to do at that time. And there I studied the history of art, mostly the Italian Renaissance, of course, and then learned how to speak Italian. Came back and got married when I was 20 and had my first child when I was 21. Right at that time, my brother, who was three years older than me, started collecting contemporary art, and he told me what he was doing, and I said, gee, I'd like to do that too. I not collect, but I wanted to learn about contemporary art. So he gave me names of galleries in New York City, and I went around by myself to galleries such as Emmerich and Marlborough, and started to learn about the history of art. At that same time, also, I was asked to be on a voluntary board at the Museum of Modern Art, and the first project I was asked to be on was in the photography department. And that was probably 1973 or 1974. I had never heard of Ansel Adams or any of the great photographers in the history of photography, and I started buying photographs at that time. There were maybe three galleries in New York City in the early 70s, and you could buy an Edward Weston or an Ansel Adams for $100, $200. So I started collecting on a very, very small level. About a year later, we decided, my family and my two little kids, my two boys, decided to move to Sun Valley, Idaho. That was in 1973. And we moved there just because my husband at the time hated New York, and we just sort of picked a place on the map of the United States, and we didn't know one single person there, and we got there. And I really didn't want to move because I was really becoming interested in photography. There happened to be an art center there, and that's what saved me. That's what made me able to stay there for 10 years, and that's where I learned all my photography. I studied with some of the great photographers in the United States at that time, and sometimes I'd be sitting in this little building in Sun Valley by myself with one of the great photographers in America, because most of the people there were skiing, or they wanted to learn how to take pictures of skiing or some kind of sport, and I wanted to study with these fine art photographers. When I went back to Rhode Island, which is our summer home and where I still live today, I started taking pictures like this one here. This is with a 35mm camera, and I started learning how to print myself. And the pictures were really about the difference between the East Coast of the United States from the West Coast. My friends that I met in Sun Valley, a lot of them were from California or Seattle, and we started talking about the differences in our backgrounds. And so I started noticing my life more, the way people dressed, the way they moved, the things they did, the way they treated each other. And so this picture called The Flag, I also, the idea of having an American flag in their pictures was very much a part of the time. Lee Friedlander always had an American flag in a picture, but also the idea that a family would bring this flag down every night was, I think, a very unusual ritual.
So at this point, you're collecting black and white photography, you're taking black and white photography. What made you switch to color?
At Sun Valley Art Center, where I worked and learned for 10 years, the teacher changed, the director of photography changed. His name was Mark Klett, and he started teaching color. And I didn't think that, that was going to fit for me very well. But what I found is that the color sense of the East Coast is very different from the West Coast. Again, the way people dressed, the way they decorated their homes. So this picture I sort of have as a marking point, 1980, because it's the first time I really remember directing someone in a photograph for the sake of the narrative. I asked my son to stand on the diving board. I asked Amy in the yellow towel to stand on the left, Brian on the right, because I wanted to show that I thought the American family was too far apart, did not show enough affection between each other, and I really wanted to start making pictures about relationships between family members.
Also, the structure of your photo has been inspired. You can see it with this photo. I think is a good example. Has been inspired by your knowledge in art history. So some of your work is, you can definitely draw parallels between 16th, 17th century European paintings and your photos, between the color palette, the composition. I actually made a slideshow right after as a comparison, which I thought.
I love doing that. I used to do that.
Yeah, it's very academic. The adoration of the shepherd, the Sano, and
You're back to the 16th century, because I usually talk about Cinquecento, Seicento. Yeah, other than that, that's really good. So this is great, because this is really what I'd like to do more. So can I just talk about?
Yeah, definitely.
I never really like to talk about technicalities too much, but one of the things that changed between that 1980 picture and this picture in 1982 is I changed cameras. And I just was talking about cameras with Pam Hansen here, and I think in my career, starting in 1973, I might have changed cameras 3 times. So I changed from a Pentax 35mm camera to a 4x5 view camera. I don't know if many of you know what that is. Sometimes I should have a picture of what that looks like. But what it makes you do, it's the one with the black thing over the head with the bellows, the image is upside down, there's ground glass. And what that camera makes you do is it makes you able to be in control of very specific details in that image or space than you couldn't possibly do with a 35mm camera. This family also was oblivious to me. They knew what a 4x5 camera was. They didn't stop. They were uninhibited. And so looking for that kind of subject is very hard to find, and that's how I was able to take this kind of picture. And you don't have much time to sort of create a structure. Most of the time it would happen in looking back at the contact sheets or the results afterwards, and that's how I do that.
So you were inspired by the painting for that and the composition, but I think another point that you brought up before was your mother and her interior design career and how that has affected your work looking to space. And so I have this picture that I have that you used actually in the past to describe the depth of field and how she placed different objects at different levels to trick the eye into thinking that the space was bigger and longer. And I used this, I went to the Met last weekend and just took a bunch of photos. This reminded me of how this Dutch painter does it too.
But was that painting a narrow, was that the whole thing?
No, I cropped it. I cropped both photos so you could see, yeah, it's a shame. You guys should look it up.
Oh, Vanderwiden, oh good. Great, I love this. Okay, so
let's go back to this full frame of this picture of Lolita Cros. Do you have a full frame?
Yeah, that one.
It's right here.
Okay, so first of all, I'd like you to notice this is the same family from the Sunday New York Times. So each year I would set these goals up for myself, and so from 1982 to 83, I'd say, okay, I'm going to move up closer. That took one whole year. And always the goal is to get more personal, to get more intimate. So the vantage point of the camera, which is talked about in film and in photography, in still photography, is where the photographer stands, the level of his camera, the level of himself, what part of the room that photographer stands in, which defines his view on the situation. One of the most important things of all, okay, where am I going to stand? I decided in this picture to bring the camera down lower because I wanted to monumentalize the woman, Tara, the beautiful woman, to look up to her as if she kind of were a Madonna. I also placed that bowl, see that red bowl back there, that bleach bowl, I placed that back there, and that's a very Dutch 17th century device that painters use to bring the eye of the viewer back into the work of art in order to make the viewer feel as if they're in that space, and then the goal is to make the viewer believe that they're there and to really understand what they're looking at. I then see the cookie tin on top. I can't remember, it was a long time ago, but I bet I placed that up there because I read a lot about visual perception and how the goal of the artist is to make the viewer's eye roam around the work of art so that the viewer is excited. So that the more that the viewer's eye is moving around, it's getting excited, it's flopping around, so that you're looking all over the place. I then placed the baby bottle in that direction, again, a perspective device that Dutch painters would use. But then there are gifts that I always talk about. The gift that Amy happens to be, I don't know what she did, but her mouth was open like that. But then that beautiful curve of Tara's feet, too, is something that, I couldn't plan for. Now, all these thoughts are happening within seconds. This is not, that just took, 4 minutes for me to talk about, but this is all happening in seconds because most of these people want to leave and go play tennis. They don't want to. So it's all very fast. And then again, in looking at the contact and looking afterwards in the editing, I'll point out this happened, and it has to be in focus, too, on top of it all.
You call these moments, or at least I've heard you call these moments believable, and how the mistake in a photo, blurriness, or the fact that her foot is not perfectly underground and a little more stiff than an average family portrait really differentiates you from those types of royal paintings that you often see. How do you incorporate that into your work, and why is it so much a part of your identity in your eye?
Well, what I'm really saying is I think they're not believable, but they're natural, honest, unpretentious, unforced. And I think it's because I move too fast, I'm clumsy, I get very excited, and I break a lot of rules because I'm just clumsy. And I think that has a lot to do with the believability, is that I'm, I haven't got a whole studio with millions of lights, et cetera, et cetera. But, I think believable is okay, but I think natural maybe is more kind of word. Yeah, candid.
Talking a bit less about the composition and more about the subject matter, I know critiques and just people in general talk about it a lot when it comes to your work. You grew up in an upper-class family, as you mentioned, so the setting of your images are very familiar to you. And, for some people, either in this room or just in general, that might be the first time they see a family like that, and they might not consider this normal, quote unquote. And I wanted to know if you ever consider your audience or your future audience when you're taking a photo.
When I started making these pictures, first of all, I never thought that the public would see them. Today, when you have students, they all think they're going to be famous in the next month. In 1973, first of all, my standards were so high because of how I grew up and the art I was surrounded by, that I really knew what really good art was, what quality was. So I never in a million years dreamt that my art was going to go out to the public. So I kept on photographing, never really thinking what reaction people would give. And then I started going out and doing talks. And until I got away from where I grew up, across the ocean to places like Finland, Leipzig, wow, it was scary. I never really prepared myself for how people would react to photographs about the upper class. And I started getting used to it as I talked more and more, but it just was something that I just was oblivious to and just wasn't prepared for. Is that what you mean?
No, I was just curious because I always wonder when an artist gets to, in front of a wide page, if it's a painter or if, photographer, if you ever incorporate the audience into your psychic.
No, I was doing this for love. I never for a second thought they'd be out there in public. But the one thing I have to say is I really believe in big fish, small pond theory. I was in the mountains in the middle of nowhere. I don't think I would ever become an artist if I had stayed in New York City, and I really mean it. And a friend of mine who happens to be here persuaded me, to make art.
I think that's very unusual to hear that.
Yeah.
I brought up this slide because this photo is actually, if you haven't seen it, in DUMBO, in the SoHo, in the Wing DUMBO. It's actually really big, so I recommend you seeing it in big, large format and printed. I kind of see your photos often as the B-roll of a family portrait, and this to me is, B-roll is like, behind the scene of a family portrait, like the whole mess before the full setup. And I like that you can see a more classical family portrait in the back, painted above the sort of chimney or
Fireplace.
Well, this in 1986, I started using lights, lots of lights, strobes. So that meant walking out of the house with 7, 8 bags of equipment. Sometimes I do it by myself, again, in great clumsiness. But what it made me able to do was light an entire room like this and have it be light outside. And I couldn't do that before, technically. And in this kind of situation, I was in heaven because I didn't have this fear of people being stiff. And so that's why I kept gravitating towards birthday parties or Christmas or something like that. But basically, this was just one of the first times I ever sort of used strobe lights and just let things go. And they ended up looking kind of candid, except for certain things that are sort of afterwards I chose that are interesting, like this big black space is very interesting to me.
Yeah.
Things like that.
There's always an escape in your
Yeah.
photos.
Yeah.
Drawing the eye out, not feeling claustrophobic. That's another example of like a more classical portrait. I love this woman, and I think you photograph women in a very specific way. They're often the center of attention, whether you realize it or not. Either they're neglected or they're. We'll come back to it. I have a little more slides.
Well, and this is taken in Europe, a project called the Europeans, so that's a whole other different style.
A photo.
Yeah, and just style than the others. Formally, they're very different. They're much more formal.
How did you get to do the Europeans?
A couple of friends said that I should apply as a visiting artist to the American Academy in Rome, and I finally paid attention. And I had 2 Italian friends that helped me in Rome, and I thought that was going to be a one-shot situation, and the project lasted 8 years. Because what I realized, I don't know why I didn't realize it more, is that Europe is very small, and a friend in Italy would say, oh, my brother is married to a German. And then I get to Germany, and he says, well, my cousin is married to a Spaniard. And so it sort of dominoed into 8 years, 6 countries in 8 years, where I went for a month each year to do this European project.
And how would you find those people?
Well, friends of friends, but then I also had friends that worked for auction houses, and that was one of the greatest helps of all, because they knew people that lived in fantastic houses, and they would just, write, this was before the internet, so it was really a slow process. They would write and say, see Tina Barney's coming. They knew nothing about contemporary art. They didn't know anything about me, but it had to do with their friend that told them, this is fun, you should try it. And that's how it was done for all that time.
Oh yeah, I love this series. So this is a small town series, jumping a bit ahead, and I actually compared it to, and but I do think that So you worked on the European series, and then after that you did the player series, where she photographed performers into their setting, waiting to go on stage. And for some reason, I think that the Small Town series is even more of a spectacle and of like people dressing up and getting ready than the player series. In all of them, there's, in this photo, they're at the bridal shop getting ready. There's another photo of people doing Civil War reenactments, and there's a bit of a spectacle, and I wanted to ask you if that was intentional, and if you wanted to show this aspect of their life rather than the mundane, like, everyday.
Well, that project was going around small towns that I live in New England, and trying to sort of find situations or traditions or rituals that tended to keep the family together, such as families that would participate in Civil War reenactments or parades, or the small town bridal shop. And, just the intention was to show these strange things that people do, that are repeated year after year, generation after generation, that sort of hold small towns and therefore families together. And they were strangers for the first time.
Right. So, how did they receive you?
They were easy. They didn't ask too much. I tried to explain what I did. They weren't really that interested. So, sometimes it was okay, and sometimes it wasn't. But most of the time, they weren't really that interested. They just sort of went with it. Yeah.
That's great. So you just talked about rituals, and you talked about events. You photograph a lot of traditions and very American traditions. And very often that work is, you photograph secular holidays and events, and I notice absence of religious imagery, which to me is what I associate rituals with. And I was wondering if you ever thought about including, the ceremony of what the bride is going to do after, like, a wedding or a bar mitzvah or some kind of religious imagery, religious tradition.
No, because I have to admit that religion just wasn't a part of my growing up. And it just wouldn't be something that I would gravitate towards or know enough about. A wedding is something I might understand, but no, it just wouldn't.
So you only saw religion in a way with the Renaissance painting. So the narration behind religion was interesting to you, but the final result of the actual ceremony was as interesting.
Yeah, it's just something I have just never got into.
Right. This photo I like a lot. This is the hands, and it really shows you capture people's mimics, how a little boy is going to copy his father, his mannerism, and where does that come from? Do we copy, a character in a movie, or how do we mimicate other people's behavior? How would you relate body language into your subjects, and how is that something that you gravitate towards?
It's just something that mystifies me. I'm in awe of it. I still can't believe it. That's sort of the anthropology, sociology in me. And it just never ceases to amaze me. And, the fact that you don't know if a son is imitating his father, or is he conscious of that or unconscious of it? It just always has interested me.
Oh, this I love. So you mentioned earlier that you went back to families more than once. So I believe it's every year you went back to the same families and photographed them. So I have a picture of this photo in '87, and then the one right after in '97 with a much more. There is, I just wanted to say that, exhausted father and, very satisfied. How do you feel about your subjects growing up, whether it's families that you know or your own children that you photographed? Is that something that you're interested in, that scares you, or do you gain a subject, or do you lose one?
What do you mean by that?
When you're growing up, so you're photographing, right here, you probably went in there being like, oh, that's a kid, I want to photograph that candid moment that's never going to happen again, and then you jump 10 years later and you get another character. A teenager is very different than a kid. And you see people that growing up, and you're photographing them and documenting them. How do you continue to be inspired by ages getting old?
You know, it sort of just keeps going. I mean, I never thought that photographing, for instance, in the town I live in would last this long or would interest me this long. And, you know, I still find it kind of just a miracle, that's all I can say. And that it still interests me. You know, and I'll probably keep on going as long as I can photograph. But, you know, I just like that idea of just going back over and over. And the fact that things don't change, or people don't move things, or if you look at a house that, you know, one plate or one painting or a chair is still in the same place as it was 40 years ago. And I just find it a miracle.
So you wouldn't be interested in showing any type of change? Like, you know, the families change a lot now. We have divorce, we have single parenting. Is that something that you would ever capture, or you're not interested in that?
I think that's too easy. I think that's too obvious. Yeah, that doesn't, I think I'm much more interested in something that's much more subtle and not so in your face. Yeah, you know, I think that the change is, if you put everything, that's the pleasure of having a book that lasts, you know, 40 years. Is that you, with the click of a hand, you can go back and see the passage of time. And that's really the only way you can see it. But, you know, otherwise it's very hard to notice. And something very obvious doesn't interest me so much.
Right. It's more the things that almost don't change. This photo I love because you really feel the legacy, and I think it's a part kind of touching on the relationships and mannerisms, how especially those grandparents in the back looking with much pride to their granddaughter and seeing the future in her.
Well, what's interesting, the most interesting thing about this photograph, when you see the real print, is the girl. And there's something about her face and the gaze or the expression in her eyes, how composed she is, that just is astounding to me. And I really felt there was a huge difference in the European children compared to American children. But, you know, they're brought up in a much stricter way. And so just their whole kind of posture and the way they greet you, and, you know, the young boys come and kiss your hand. And, you know, it's like another planet, really.
I saw this at the Mails and reminded me of it. The attitude and the, you know, hand on hip.
Yeah, Georgia is close to my heart.
The colors, you definitely recognize this palette in your photos. Those pinks and reds. Let's see what. Oh yeah. I just love the story with this photo. That was a family commission, and you don't love family commissions from what I've heard you said in the past. And so this was, maybe you can explain the story behind this.
Oh, I don't look family commissions because usually they're kind of stiff, and you know, the people aren't maybe that diverse, but I was photographing this, I thought, very conservative family. And I thought that I was paying attention to the equipment, all the complicated things, and I thought the mother said my daughter's going to wear a boa. And she comes walking after this snake. And I don't know why I didn't absolutely freak out and just turn around and leave, but it was too interesting to pass up. And the gloves, and the dress. She wore the dress, I didn't choose it.
The attitude in it, but see, that's what I mean by the eye that you have on women when you photograph them, is that you often feel the stiffness around it, and women usually bring the curve. I like the shape that this snake is making, and the freshness and the movement in general. And I have a similar photo with this one. That was another example of like her with her bright dress kind of like coming through the frame and showing movement around this like stiff European man.
Well, this is a fashion shoot, and they found these kids on the street, literally, the magazine did, literally, they're not professionals, and the boys came into this hotel room and they were so terrified and stiff, and luckily this girl was older, and she just loosened up the whole picture because it almost was impossible to take the picture. The boys were so stiff.
I was wondering if when you first originally started shooting, were you trying to be pretty purposeful and careful in every single image you took, or was it one of those things where you were just like, I want to go with my intuition and I'm going to shoot and then I'll see whatever I find beautiful after I develop the film?
I am so untechnical that it's frightening. And I think sometimes that's why the pictures look natural, because I really was on my own after I left Sun Valley, I had nobody to ask, and it was trial and error. And still, I basically know what I want, and then sort of go through a stepping stone period to get to it. So I never sort of think about it. It's just kind of blind luck.
Do you get surprised, in the edit, when you do the edit by things?
Well, I don't get surprised. Sometimes I'm very disappointed. The focus is the thing that I really love to death. I mean, that's why we use a camera. And sometimes I don't have the focus, and that's just painful to me. And that's the one thing I just, and the light. The light isn't good. Now in digital you can fool around with that more, but there are technical things that I, sort of, didn't do well at a lot of the time, but other things that were terrific surprises.
I have one more question. Do you enjoy still shooting in black and white?
Shooting in black and white?
Yeah.
Very, very, very much. I did a whole body of work in black and white that I loved to death, but the public didn't dig it. I took one to a museum. People just never have reacted to it, and I absolutely love it.
One more question in the front. So you say you're not technical, but on some level you started using lights, and you went to work with lights, and you showed up yourself photographing your family with lights, or you had somebody?
I did it myself, dragging them. I dragged all three lights under. I dragged the whole thing. I don't know. I guess I did it. I did, survival sort of.
Right. So in fact, you
Yeah, but it depends who you compare that to.
than others.
It depends who you compare technical to.
Yes.
If you ask me what f-stop or speed, I barely would know that, or something like that.
And even now you go with your lights alone, or not
Oh,
with
no.
somebody?
Mostly because it frees me up to do the thinking. That was the part that was hard, is I didn't have time to do the thinking and the, talking to the people who are really thinking about what I was doing in between. I had to worry about, that's the biggest reason I started using assistants. I thought they were going to ruin the intimacy, but it just freed me up.
One more question, and then I think we should finish up.
Oh, yes.
Okay, I think her question made me think of this, but you mentioned some black and white series that wasn't well received, or you said there wasn't an audience for it, or you didn't feel it was successful. I think the issue of reception is something that is super difficult, or like it's always a tightrope for artists to be like, well, I said what I needed to say. Reception isn't something I'm concerned about, while also being realistic and being like, well, how it's received is how I get my next job. So how do you relate to your pieces after they've been received or not received?
Well, I'm not the right person to ask that question to, because I've been so lucky right from the beginning. So I'm just not the right, because my work has been received well for so long, and I think there were a lot of sort of bloopers in there, but I think it gave me confidence to say I don't care,
Right,
and believe me, forget about making the money. That
right.
people think they can do it. That's another sort of whole other thing in itself, but yeah, I've been lucky. So I don't think what other people care what other people think.
How did you get your picture, out there at first? Just you did a portfolio and
How do I? Well, my fine artwork or the editorial? Fine art. Oh, this was a great story. Well, I was in Sun Valley. There was an art gallery there called the Potato Gallery, and Mary Rowland was the director of that gallery. And she made me show my work. I never would have shown it because my standards were so high. And she kept pushing me, and she kept showing it. And then she said I should enter a contest in the Boise Gallery of Art. And I didn't want to do it. She kept pushing me, and I did it. Then I won an award. And Patterson Sims, who's a well-known curator, gave me an award. And he said, I think you should show these pictures to Janet Borden. And I knew Janet because I collected from her. So I showed them to Janet, and she started representing my work. And that's how it all happened. I got one picture in the Museum of Modern Art show. that helped, but having a dealer who, knew what was going on, was really encouraging and just knew the people in the business.
And that was the 70s.
That was in 1982, 83.
So you were showing, you were living in Sun Valley, but you were coming back
I
here.
moved back here in 1983. So, and I started showing, and it took a long time.
But the photographs you took in the 70s, you were
They
doing
were in
the
Rhode
summer.
Island in the summers. So I kept coming back from Rhode Island, up from Sun Valley in the
You
summer.
didn't really shoot anything in Sun Valley.
I never photographed anything but a puddle or a barn fence and really boring pictures.
It's interesting that you were living out there.
It was so foreign to me. I was more comfortable they brought me to China or Japan. It just was not, the colors weren't me, the textures, what people wore, it just didn't interest me.
I think that's it. Thank you all for coming.